The forest woke slowly as morning light moved between the tall trees. Mist rested close to the ground, and the smell of wet soil filled the air. Leaves whispered softly as a light breeze passed through them. This forest was old and deep, a place where time felt slower and human voices rarely stayed for long. Many people avoided going too far inside, but for Ranger Tom, this forest was part of his daily life. Tom had worked as a ranger for more than 10 years. He knew the paths, the streams, and the quiet corners where animals liked to rest. He respected the forest and believed it spoke in its own silent way. Every sound mattered to him. Every broken branch or changed trail told a story. That morning, something felt unusual. The forest seemed more watchful than calm. Tom followed his usual route, checking for fallen trees and signs of trouble. His boots pressed gently into the soft ground. As he walked, he noticed fresh marks near the path. They were not animal tracks. They were small human footprints. That surprised him because no village existed nearby, and visitors were rare in this deep area. The footprints looked careful, as if the person who made them tried not to disturb anything. Curiosity pulled Tom forward. He followed the footprints deeper into the forest, passing thick bushes and tall roots that rose from the ground like walls. The light became dimmer, and the air cooler. Birds watched from high branches, their heads tilting as Tom passed. The forest felt alive in a different way now, as if it was hiding something important. After walking for some time, Tom reached a small open space. In the center stood a giant oak tree. It was larger than any oak Tom had ever seen. Its trunk was wide enough that 3 people holding hands could not circle it fully. The bark was rough and deeply lined, showing its great age. The branches stretched outward like strong arms, holding the sky above. Tom stopped and stared. The oak felt powerful, almost like a silent guardian of the forest. He stepped closer, feeling a strange pull toward it. That was when he noticed something that made his breath slow. On the side of the oak trunk was a small wooden door. The door was real. It was carved neatly into the tree, shaped to fit the curve of the trunk. It had a simple handle made of metal and tiny hinges fixed carefully into the wood. The door was old but strong. Someone had taken time to build it with care and respect. Tom's mind raced. He had patrolled this area many times before, yet he had never seen this door. He looked around, checking the ground. The footprints led directly to the oak and stopped there. More marks were near the roots, showing regular movement. This place was not abandoned. Tom placed his hand near the door but did not touch it. He listened closely. At first, there was only silence. Then he heard a soft sound from inside the tree. It was slow movement, like someone shifting their weight or moving an object carefully. The sound was gentle, not hurried. A mix of feelings filled Tom. Surprise, concern, and a deep sense of wonder. Who could live inside a living tree? How long had this been here? Why had no one reported it? The forest had always been full of mysteries, but this was beyond anything Tom expected. He stepped back and studied the oak again. The tree did not look harmed. The door had been placed without cutting deep into the trunk. Moss grew around it naturally, blending the door into the bark. Whoever lived here understood the forest and knew how to remain unseen. Tom thought about calling for help, but something stopped him. The place felt peaceful, not dangerous. There were no signs of harm or struggle. Only quiet care and balance. He decided to observe first before taking action. As he waited, the door slowly opened. Just a little. Tom held his breath. A small hand appeared, resting on the edge of the door. The hand looked human, thin but steady. Then the door opened wider, revealing a figure standing inside the hollow space of the oak. The person was an old man named Ben. His hair was long and gray, tied back loosely. His clothes were simple and clean, made of old fabric patched carefully. His eyes were calm and sharp, filled with awareness rather than fear. He did not look surprised to see Tom, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. Ben stepped out slowly, placing his feet gently on the ground. He looked at Tom with a soft expression. There was no anger in his face, no worry, only acceptance. Tom spoke first, keeping his voice calm. He asked who Ben was and how long he had lived there. Ben smiled slightly and looked at the oak behind him. He said he had lived there for many years, longer than Tom had been a ranger. He said the tree had given him shelter, and in return, he protected it. Tom listened closely. He noticed how Ben spoke about the forest as if it were a friend. Ben explained that he had chosen to live away from people after losing everything he once had. The forest gave him peace, and the oak became his home. As they talked, Tom realized this was not a story of harm or trouble. It was a story of survival and quiet strength. Ben had built a life hidden from the world, not to escape the law, but to find meaning again. The sun climbed higher, lighting the open space around them. The oak stood tall and silent, watching over both men. Tom knew this discovery would change his duties forever. He also knew that the forest still held many secrets, and this was only the beginning. The morning light grew stronger as Tom and Ben stood near the giant oak. The forest slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Birds began to sing again, and the breeze moved freely through the leaves. The moment no longer felt tense, but it still carried weight. Tom knew he had stepped into a hidden story that had been waiting for years to be seen. Ben invited Tom closer to the oak. He opened the wooden door wider and stepped aside. Inside the tree was a small living space carved carefully into the hollow trunk. The walls were smooth and clean. Wooden shelves held simple tools, jars, and folded cloth. A small bed rested against one side, covered with a thick blanket. Light entered through small openings higher up in the trunk, placed in a way that did not harm the tree. Tom looked around with quiet amazement. Everything inside showed patience and skill. Nothing was rushed. Nothing felt careless. This was not a shelter made in desperation. It was a home shaped with respect. Ben explained that the oak had been hollow long before he arrived. He said he never cut the tree to make space. He only shaped what already existed. Over time, the tree continued to grow around the space, protecting it like a living wall. Tom asked how Ben survived all these years without being noticed. Ben smiled gently and said the forest taught him how to live quietly. He moved only when needed. He took only what he required. He listened more than he spoke. The forest rewarded care with safety. As they talked, Tom learned more about Ben's past. Ben once lived in a small town far from the forest. He had a simple life and worked with his hands. Then one year, heavy storms changed everything. His home was damaged, his work was gone, and the place he trusted no longer felt safe. He wandered for a long time, searching for peace rather than comfort. When Ben first found the oak, he said it felt like meeting an old friend. The tree stood firm through storms and time. It asked for nothing but respect. Ben stayed near it, sleeping under its branches until one day he realized the hollow trunk could offer shelter. Slowly, his life took a new shape. Tom listened with care. He had met many people during his years as a ranger, but none like Ben. There was strength in Ben's quiet voice and wisdom in his calm eyes. This was not a man hiding from the world out of fear. This was a man who chose a different way to live. Tom also felt the weight of responsibility. As a ranger, he was meant to protect the forest and follow rules. Hidden dwellings were not allowed. Living inside protected land raised serious questions. Still, Tom could not ignore the balance Ben had kept for so long. Later that day, Tom walked around the oak and the nearby area. He saw no trash, no damage, no broken plants. Paths were lightly used and blended into the forest floor. Even animals seemed comfortable near the tree. Squirrels moved along the branches above, and a deer watched calmly from a distance. Tom realized that Ben had become part of the forest rather than a problem within it. As the sun reached its highest point, Tom told Ben he would need to report the discovery. He spoke honestly but gently. Ben nodded. He said he understood and had expected this day to come eventually. There was no fear in his response. Only acceptance. Before leaving, Tom asked one final question. He asked if Ben would leave the oak if asked. Ben looked at the tree for a long moment before answering. He said he would do what was right for the forest, even if it meant walking away. The oak had given him shelter, and he would not repay it with harm. That answer stayed with Tom as he walked back toward the ranger station. Each step felt heavier than usual. He knew the report he wrote would matter. The choice he made could change Ben's life forever. That evening, Tom sat alone and wrote carefully. He described the oak, the dwelling, and the man who lived there. He did not write with judgment. He wrote with truth. He explained how the tree was unharmed and how the forest showed signs of balance rather than damage. As night fell, the forest grew quiet again. Ben sat inside the oak, listening to the familiar sounds around him. He did not know what the future held, but he felt ready. The forest had taught him patience, and patience would guide him again. Far away, Tom stared out a window, thinking about rules and responsibility, but also about kindness and understanding. He knew the next days would bring difficult decisions. The discovery inside the giant oak was no longer just a secret. It was a test of how people chose to treat what they did not fully understand. The next morning arrived with pale light and cool air. Mist moved slowly between the trees as if the forest itself was thinking. Ben woke early inside the oak. He folded his blanket, placed his tools in order, and sat quietly for a while. He listened to the sounds he knew well. Leaves shifting, birds calling, the soft knock of a branch touching the trunk. The oak felt steady beneath his hand, strong and calm. Ben knew change was coming. He did not fear it, but he respected it. Life had taught him that nothing stayed the same for long. Still, he hoped the forest would be treated with care. At the ranger station, Tom arrived earlier than usual. He had not slept much. His report rested on the desk, written clearly and honestly. Other rangers gathered for the morning meeting. They spoke about trails and weather and fallen trees. When it was Tom's turn, he shared what he had found. The room grew quiet as Tom described the giant oak and the small door. He explained how the tree was unharmed and how a man named Ben lived there peacefully. Some rangers looked surprised. Others looked doubtful. A few exchanged concerned glances. A senior ranger named Mark asked many questions. He wanted details about safety and land rules. Tom answered carefully. He spoke about balance and respect. He said the forest showed no signs of damage near the oak. He said animals moved freely there. Mark listened closely. He was known for following rules strictly, but he also cared deeply about the land. He decided a visit was needed before any decision could be made. By midday, Tom led Mark and another ranger named Luke into the forest. They followed the same path Tom had taken before. The forest seemed to watch them quietly. When they reached the open space, the giant oak stood just as tall and silent as before. Ben saw them approach. He stepped out of the oak calmly and greeted them with a gentle nod. There was no tension in his posture. He had expected visitors. Mark studied the tree first. He walked around it slowly, touching the bark, examining the roots. He checked the door carefully. Luke looked around the area, searching for signs of harm. They found none. Mark then spoke with Ben. He asked how long Ben had lived there and why he chose the forest. Ben answered honestly. He spoke about loss, about learning to live with less, and about finding peace in quiet places. His words were simple but full of meaning. As Ben spoke, Mark noticed something important. The man did not speak as someone who took from the forest. He spoke as someone who belonged to it. They asked to see inside the oak. Ben agreed. Mark stepped inside carefully. He saw the small space shaped with skill and patience. He saw tools made to last, not to waste. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was extra. Mark stepped back outside and took a deep breath. He looked at Tom. He looked at Ben. The decision was not simple. Rules existed for a reason. Protected land needed protection. Still, the forest itself showed no sign of distress. The oak stood healthy and strong. Ben had lived there for years without causing harm. Mark told Ben that living inside protected land was not allowed. Ben nodded. He said he understood. He said he would leave if asked. There was sadness in his eyes, but no anger. Tom felt a tight feeling in his chest. He did not want this story to end with loss. Mark asked for time. He said a final decision would be made after discussion with higher officials. Until then, Ben could remain as long as nothing changed. Ben thanked him quietly. After the rangers left, the forest felt still again. Ben returned inside the oak and sat near the inner wall. He placed his hand on the wood and closed his eyes. He remembered the storms he had survived, the long walks, the nights spent under open sky. Whatever came next, he would face it with calm. Days passed slowly. Tom returned often to check on the area. Each visit showed the same balance. The forest remained healthy. The oak remained strong. Ben remained quiet and respectful. Word of the dwelling began to spread quietly among the rangers. Some supported Ben. Others worried about what his presence could encourage. Tom understood both sides. He knew one choice could set an example that would shape the future of the forest. One evening, a sudden storm moved in. Wind rushed through the trees, and rain fell hard. Tom worried about the oak and about Ben. He hurried through the forest despite the weather. When he reached the oak, he saw Ben standing outside, guiding water away from the roots using small channels he had built long ago. The tree stood firm against the storm. Ben worked calmly, protecting the oak as if it were family. Tom watched from a distance, understanding something deeply. This man did not just live in the forest. He cared for it in ways few people ever did. When the storm passed, the forest felt renewed. Fresh leaves glistened under the fading light. Tom knew the decision ahead would not only affect one man. It would show whether understanding could stand beside rules. As night settled, Ben returned inside the oak. Tom stood beneath the branches, looking up at the leaves. He felt certain that the story of the giant oak was far from over. The forest had spoken quietly. Now it was up to people to listen. The storm left the forest cleaner and brighter. Water still hung on the leaves like small glass beads. The air smelled fresh, and the ground felt soft underfoot. Morning sunlight returned, touching the giant oak and making its bark shine in warm patches. Ben stepped outside the tree and checked the roots as he always did after heavy rain. He moved slowly, careful not to press too hard on the wet soil. The oak had carried him through years of lonely seasons, and he treated it like a living promise. Tom arrived later that day with a bag of supplies. He did not bring much, only a few basic items that could be useful without changing Ben's simple life. A small roll of rope, a clean cloth, and some dry food. He offered them quietly. Ben accepted with a nod, not as a beggar, but as someone receiving help from a friend. Tom did not speak much at first. He watched Ben check the small water channels near the roots, then watched him adjust a piece of bark that had loosened during the storm. Tom finally told Ben that officials from outside the station were coming. They wanted to see the oak and the dwelling with their own eyes. Tom's voice stayed calm, but his eyes showed worry. Ben listened and did not interrupt. When Tom finished, Ben looked at the oak trunk for a long moment. Then he said he would speak honestly, the same way he had spoken to Mark and the other rangers. He said the truth was the only strong shelter a person could carry. The next day, the forest felt different. More footsteps moved along the trail. Not loud, not wild, but unfamiliar. Tom led a small group toward the open space. Mark walked beside him. Two officials followed, a man named Harris and a woman named Nora. They wore clean jackets and carried notebooks. Their eyes moved quickly over everything, as if they were measuring the forest with their minds. When the group reached the oak, they stopped and stared. The tree was even more impressive up close. The wide trunk looked like a wall built by time. The small wooden door seemed almost unreal against such a giant living body. Harris stepped forward first. He examined the door and the bark around it. He spoke in a low voice to Nora, pointing at the hinges and the handle. Nora moved closer to the roots and studied the ground. She saw the light paths, the careful steps, the lack of waste. Ben came out before anyone knocked. He stood in front of the oak calmly. He did not smile, but his face was not hard. It was steady, like a person who had nothing to hide. Tom introduced him. Harris asked Ben how long he had been living there. Ben answered clearly. He said many years. Harris asked why he chose this life. Ben said he needed quiet after life had broken into pieces, and the forest gave him a place to rebuild. Nora asked if Ben ever cut the oak. Ben said no. He explained that the tree was hollow before he arrived. He only cleaned the space and added simple wood pieces that could be removed without harm. He showed them how small openings allowed light to enter without cutting deep. He described how he moved water away from the roots during storms. He spoke about taking fallen branches for fuel, never cutting healthy ones. He spoke about leaving seeds where they could grow. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of long practice. Harris asked to see inside. Ben opened the door and stepped aside. The officials entered one by one. The small space felt warm, quiet, and carefully arranged. Nora noticed the shelves and jars. Harris noticed the tools and the neat patches on Ben's clothes. They looked at the bed, the blanket, the small place where Ben kept dry wood. Nothing inside felt like a threat. It felt like a person had built a life with patience. When they stepped back out, Harris turned to Mark. He reminded everyone that protected land had rules, and those rules were not written for one person. He said allowing someone to stay could encourage others to build hidden shelters, which could harm the forest. Mark agreed. Tom stayed silent, knowing that argument was strong. Then Nora spoke. She said rules mattered, but facts mattered too. She pointed to the ground and the tree. She said this place showed care, not damage. She said the forest was not crying out here. It was calm. She suggested a different path. She suggested a supervised plan. Ben could remain for a limited time under clear conditions. No expansion. No visitors. Regular checks. A written agreement. She said the forest could be protected while also honoring the truth of what was already working. Harris did not like the idea at first. He looked at Ben as if trying to read his future actions. Ben met his gaze without fear. Ben said he would accept any condition that protected the forest. He said he never wanted attention. He only wanted to live quietly and keep the oak safe. He said if the forest needed him to leave, he would go. He would not fight. He would not resist. He would simply walk away with respect. Tom saw something shift in the group. Not a full change, but a softening. Harris was still strict, but he could not ignore what he had seen. The oak was healthy. The dwelling was small. The area was clean. The man standing there was calm and honest. Mark suggested a trial period. He said Ben could stay for now, but only if he helped the rangers in small ways. Not as an official worker, but as a guide who understood the deep forest. Ben agreed. He said he would show them hidden water paths, safe crossings, and places where the ground could flood after storms. Nora wrote notes quickly. Harris frowned but did not reject it. Before leaving, Nora asked Ben a quiet question. She asked what Ben planned to do if he had to leave one day. Ben looked at the oak and then at the open forest. He said he would carry what he learned. He said home was not only walls. Home was a way of living. If he had to go, he would find another quiet place and live with the same respect. After the group walked away, Tom stayed behind for a moment. He stood near the roots and looked at the door. Ben stood beside him, both men quiet. Tom finally spoke and said he was not sure what would happen next. Ben answered that life always moved forward, even when people wanted it to pause. He said the oak had survived many changes, and so would he. That evening, Tom returned to the station with mixed feelings. The officials did not make a final decision yet, but they did not force Ben out either. A small window of time had opened, and inside it, there was hope. Tom knew the next step would matter. The forest was watching. The oak was waiting. Ben was ready. And Tom felt that the most surprising part of the story was still ahead. Weeks passed quietly in the forest. The giant oak stood steady through warm days and cool nights. Leaves changed color slowly, and the ground filled with soft layers of fallen gold and brown. Life moved forward without rush. Ben followed the agreement with care. He made no changes to the dwelling. He welcomed no visitors. He kept the paths light and clean. Rangers came at regular times, and each visit showed the same calm balance. Tom often walked with Ben through deeper parts of the forest. Ben showed him places where water gathered after rain and places where animals crossed safely. He explained how certain plants signaled changes in weather. Tom listened closely. He realized Ben saw the forest not as land to manage, but as a living guide that spoke through patterns and patience. Other rangers began to notice the value of Ben's quiet knowledge. Small problems were prevented before they grew. Flooded paths were prepared for early. Fallen trees were spotted quickly. The forest felt safer, not weaker. One afternoon, Mark called a meeting at the station. Harris and Nora returned, this time without notebooks. They walked the forest again, slower than before. Harris watched how Ben moved. He noticed how Ben stepped around young plants and avoided fragile ground. Nora spoke with Tom and Mark, asking about changes since the last visit. The answers were clear. The forest was stable. Wildlife activity had improved in some areas. They returned to the oak and stood together beneath its wide branches. Harris took a long breath and spoke carefully. He said rules still mattered, but sometimes rules needed thoughtful space. He said this case was rare and would remain rare. He announced the final decision. Ben would be allowed to stay. The permission came with conditions, but they were fair. The dwelling would remain small. No new structures would be added. Ben would continue guiding rangers when needed. Regular checks would continue. If harm ever appeared, the agreement would end. Ben accepted every word without hesitation. Tom felt a quiet relief settle in his chest. Mark nodded with respect. Nora smiled softly, as if the forest itself had agreed. When the officials left, the forest felt lighter. Ben stood near the oak and placed his hand against the bark. He closed his eyes for a moment. Years of walking alone, of sleeping under open sky, of building a life from broken pieces led to this simple peace. He did not feel pride. He felt gratitude. Life continued in gentle ways. Ben helped rangers during storms and guided lost hikers back to safe trails. He spoke little and listened much. People who passed near the oak never noticed the door unless they knew where to look. The tree remained a secret held by trust rather than fear. One evening, Tom sat near the oak as the sun lowered. Light passed through the branches and touched the ground in long shapes. He asked Ben if he ever wished to return to a town or a house with walls and windows. Ben thought for a while before answering. He said walls did not always keep peace inside them. He said he had learned that safety came from understanding limits, not building higher barriers. Tom understood. His own life felt busy and loud at times. Standing there, he felt the forest slow his thoughts. Seasons changed. Snow came softly one year, resting on the branches like quiet blankets. Ben prepared carefully, storing dry wood and checking the roots. Rangers visited more often during cold days, and Ben welcomed them with calm presence. The oak held strong, just as it always had. One morning, Tom arrived early and found Ben sitting outside the door, watching birds gather seeds. Ben looked older, but his eyes remained clear. He told Tom he felt tired in a gentle way. Not weak, but ready for rest when the time came. Tom felt a tightness in his throat, but Ben smiled and said every tree knew when to shed leaves. Years later, when Ben finally left the forest, he did so quietly. He packed only what he needed and touched the oak one last time. He left at sunrise, walking the same careful paths he had protected for so long. No one followed him. No one needed to. The dwelling inside the oak was closed, but never removed. Rangers decided to leave it untouched. It became a symbol rather than a shelter. A reminder that care could exist without ownership, and that respect could shape better choices. Tom continued his work for many years. Whenever new rangers arrived, he told them the story of the giant oak. He spoke about rules, but also about listening. He spoke about balance and patience. He spoke about a man who lived quietly and taught the forest to speak louder through his actions. The oak still stands tall. Birds nest in its branches. Roots hold the earth firm. Wind moves through its leaves like a steady breath. To most, it is just a tree. To those who know the story, it is proof that the most shocking discovery was not who lived inside the oak, but how deeply one person learned to belong.